Thank you, Honourable Chair. Through you to the Minister, could the Minister explain which clause specifically in this bill, or where in the particular clause we're discussing this afternoon, there is streamlining and modernization and elimination of unnecessary regulation and red tape?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. From this day forward, our government will be required by law to focus its efforts on red tape reduction. It provides a focal point for citizens to be a citizen-centred process with improvements in government services. This is about ensuring that we have accountability, transparency, continuous improvement. 1 day per year will be the focus. Red tape reduction, regulation, repeal day.
Member.
Thank you, Chair. What specific legally binding language in this Act requires the government to do anything other than recognize a single day per year with the name Red Tape Reduction Day?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Pure and simple, it's the citizens from across British Columbia who 1 day a year know that they can look to our government to ensure that we report out and showcase and put a spotlight on the unnecessary red tape reductions that we have focused on, not just in small business, but across ministries.
Member.
Honourable Chair, the Minister very clearly said that from this day forward, when this bill becomes an act, the government will be legally required to eliminate red tape, and she has not answered the question about where in this bill the legal requirement exists. I would ask that she answer the question specifically. Where is the legal requirement for the government to eliminate red tape that is contained within this bill?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. It provides a focal point for citizens across the province on Red Tape Reduction Day to know that, that there will be a course throughout leading up to that where citizens have the opportunity to engage with the provincial government on ways that they can improve and do things more efficiently. And I think what is also critically important is we're listening to our public service who are saying that there are ways and there are pieces that within their particular ministries that they can be improving things, whether it's forms, whether it's phone trees, whether it's the way that we do business as government. By shining a focus on a Red Tape Reduction Day, it'll ensure that progress will be made on important housekeeping, ensure that we are maintaining our commitment to the citizens of British Columbia for efficient government.
Member.
Honourable Chair, I've asked twice where the legal requirement that the Minister claimed is contained within this bill for government to reduce red tape, exists, and twice she has answered by saying it will provide a focal point for citizens. If the minister cannot answer the question to tell this legislature and the people of British Columbia exactly where in this bill a legal requirement exists that will hold government to account for eliminating red tape, a legal requirement for government, will she withdraw her previous statement because it is misleading if she cannot answer the question?
Minister.
Thank you, Honourable Chair. We are required by law to have a red tape reduction day of each year on the first Wednesday of March.
Member.
Honourable Chair, how is the requirement to have a red tape reduction day the same as a requirement to actually reduce red tape, when in fact it just puts another piece of legislation on the books?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. Again, this will ensure that we are remain focused every day on Red Tape Reduction Day of every year. There will be a requirement through law to have this day, and it provides citizens from across British Columbia because we will be ensuring that we are doing the necessary outreach, and we are starting that. We have started it, but we'll be more formally enhancing upon that citizen engagement process across British Columbia, to talk to citizens, to talk to folks in every single one of your communities about how government can be ran more efficiently. Are there pieces of regulation that just do not make sense? Are there ways that as a government we could do things better? If you are looking at, for example, say there is a form that takes 13 pages, is there a way that we can actually look at making that a reasonable 2-page form? Honourable Chair, what this does is, by making sure that we have legislation that ensures that we have a Red Tape Reduction Act, it makes sure that every year that the government will maintain its focus on what we have heard throughout British Columbia, that there is a strong need to ensure that the government continues with our efforts on reducing unnecessary red tape, that we are supporting engagement with citizens from throughout British Columbia, and ensuring that the success that we've had on the small business side of reducing over 155,000 pieces of unnecessary red tape and regulation, that we are moving that more broadly across ministries within government.
Member.
Honourable Chair, perhaps the minister could explain to this legislature and the people of British Columbia exactly which legally binding words in this bill require the government to go out and consult with British Columbians about reducing red tape, or even provides an enabling provision for the Lieutenant Governor and Council to enact regulations to do that. Which specific words?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. So I've just spent the considerable part of the day with the Franchises Act, a piece of legislation that I would suggest, while I know that both sides of this House thinks and knows are critically important. Within that, we know that we will go out and we will consult and we'll work on education with citizens from across British Columbia. It is not embedded within the legislation. As other pieces of legislation, it is a piece of if you looked at the Franchises Act, as you go to explore other pieces on the regulations, as you go to create legislation, of course you go out and consult, but it's not written into the legislation.
Member.
Well, Chair, we are in committee stage on a bill. We're discussing the sections of the bill and the words within the sections. Which specific words, was my question to the minister, require this government to do anything at all other than name a particular day?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. In Section 1, the bill mentions the day of the Act.
Member.
Honourable Chair, as my colleague from Vancouver Kingsway has pointed out, it is quite within the power of Cabinet to proclaim days and weeks for various events and various elements of awareness to recognize a variety of things, and in fact, that has been done. That has been done with an entire week devoted to red tape reduction. But it is, as the member from Vancouver Kingsway and others have pointed out, a very unique and rarely used tool for an act of this legislature to proclaim a particular day for a particular purpose. It has been used simply 5 times. It is, at least according to my understanding, something that is done in a nonpartisan nature with support from both sides of the House because of the importance of the act, the importance of recognizing a very specific and historic event in British Columbia history, something in the world that we wish everybody to learn from and never repeat, to recognize a very rare and unique individual, to celebrate a very important British Columbian holiday. Honourable Speaker, twice in my time in this legislature, we have been in the Rotunda to note Holocaust Memorial Day on Yom HaShoah. Joining us in the Rotunda are survivors of the Holocaust, their families, members of the community. They come because it's important to remember what happened in the middle of the last century in Europe when 6 million Jews, Roma, gay and lesbian people, and others were murdered. They were disappeared. It was a genocide. It was not the last genocide we've experienced in this world, Honourable Chair, and that is why people whose own lives and histories and families had been scarred by the Holocaust spoke so movingly in the Rotunda of this legislature about how it was not just a remembrance of the Holocaust. It wasn't just Yom HaShoah. It was important to understand that other genocides had taken place and there had to be solidarity and common cause with other victims, with other communities. It had to be a process of recognition and solidarity and constant reminder to people around the world, but particularly in the case of Holocaust Memorial Day in British Columbia, one of the 5 days recognized by an act of this legislature that acts of genocide can happen at any time, and in order to prevent them, we need to recognize what happened in the past, we need to honor the victims, we need to talk about the future, and we need to discuss the conditions that lead to such genocides. We need to educate, we need to be aware, we need to not pretend that it is simply something that occurred in history and is unlikely to ever happen again. Honourable Speaker, this bill would place Red Tape Reduction Day on a par with only 5 other days recognized by this legislature. Honourable Speaker, is the minister intending to attend Holocaust Memorial Day in the Rotunda of the legislature next year and say to the assembled families of survivors of the Holocaust how their Memorial Day compares in import, impact, and importance with a 2-line act, an unnecessary act because it contains nothing concrete, nothing substantial, and nothing enabling to actually reduce red tape, how the bill that recognized the horrors that they and their families and their communities lived through are now on a par with a day to reduce red tape.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. And of course, Honourable Chair, through the member opposite, that on both sides of the House, when we look at the significance, importance of recognizing days such as Holocaust Day, Terry Fox Day, BC Day, Douglas Day, of course, Honourable Chair, that on both sides of the House, it is critically important to us. Honourable Chair, this piece of legislation is not an either-or. This is an important piece of legislation to provide a focal point for our government, as other governments from around the world are currently doing. Honourable Chair, I would like to quote, if I may, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and it was asked who has stood forward and said that this piece of legislation is important. In survey after survey, small business owners across Canada continue to say red tape is of top concern and express frustrations that too many governments are not taking the problem seriously enough. Honourable Speaker, we are taking it serious, and that is why we are introducing this piece today. I go on to quote Laura Jones from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business. It makes sense to have a specific day for the people of British Columbia to reflect on progress being made by their government on clearing out unnecessary rules, sweeping away old and cumbersome regulations, and ensuring that red tape doesn't clutter the environment for small business. Honourable Chair, it is not either or. It's about ensuring that as governments, we are continuously looking at ways to improve our efficiency, and this is an important piece in that.
Member.
Honourable Speaker, earlier this year, I was asked to speak at Holocaust Memorial Day in the rotunda of the Legislature. I believe I was asked to speak because I grew up in a household with my grandmother, who had been locked up in the Warsaw Ghetto where so many people were killed, where she escaped through the kindness of neighbors who smuggled her out. I grew up in a household with a father who knew his parents had died but did not know how they had died, did not know where they had died, just knew that they had died in all likelihood either in a death camp or on their way to a death camp during the Holocaust. Honourable Speaker, we can make many decisions about how we recognize important actions that the Legislature can take. But, Honourable Speaker, there is a hierarchy of values, there is a hierarchy of impacts, and I would ask again of the Minister why the Minister believes that there is any similarity in the impacts and import of recognizing the reduction of red tape as one of 6 days recognized by this Legislature in this province is equal to the remembrance of the murder of 6 million people and millions in other genocides, and the importance of raising awareness so this will never happen again.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair. And again, to the member opposite, this is in no way meant to diminish any of the other days. It's not an either or an or. Honourable Chair, this is about ensuring that we remain a committed focus to the important work of ensuring that we are looking at unnecessary red tape. Complying with rules and regulation cost Canadian businesses of all sizes $37 billion in 2014, including $5.2 billion in British Columbia. Small businesses owners believe that the regulatory burden could be reduced by about another 30% for an annual savings to the economy of $11 billion. 70% of business owners say excess regulations add significant stress to their life. Honourable Chair, this act is about ensuring that we remain focused and committed to our focus on reducing red tape, to ensure that we are providing an environment that supports the greatest success for small businesses, that ensures that as we reach out to citizens from across British Columbia, that we are listening to ways that as a government that we can do things more efficiently. And by ensuring that we are legislating a day and ensuring that the focus is maintained consistently, that we will ensure that we move forward on these significant efforts to ensure that we are supporting removal of outdated and counterproductive regulations, that we are saving time and frustrations on behalf of citizens, that we're making it easier for businesses to understand and meet the requirements that they must comply with, and encourages investments from businesses attracted by a straightforward regulatory regime. It's not either or. It is about ensuring that we remain committed, that we have a focus as government, legislated through a day in British Columbia, that we shine a spotlight on, as government, maintaining our commitment to a net zero regulatory count.
Member.
Honourable Chair, I have stood in this House, other members of my caucus have stood in this House, and we have acknowledged that unnecessary or duplicate regulation need not and should not exist, that red tape should and can be reduced. Red Tape Reduction Week is committed to that. We believe in that. We can support that. But my question to the minister was, how would the minister explain to people who came to the rotunda of this legislature next year, in memory of Holocaust Memorial Day, in memory of 6 million Jews and Roma and gays and lesbians who were murdered or disappeared, whose families were scarred, who also, in the midst of their pain, recognized victims of the Armenian genocide and others. And her answer was, when I asked her how she would explain to them that the import of their day was the same as Red Tape Reduction Day, that she equates it with $11 billion attributed cost to red tape and unnecessary and anxiety and stress on businesses, all of which every member of this House is committed to address in other ways. Honourable Speaker, that was the answer of the minister. So my question for the minister this time, should this House, for example, at some point in the future, decide to come together and recognize the injustices that were committed against the First Peoples of this province and nation, the residential schools, the inequities, the taking of their land, the destroying of their property, the health risks that were introduced, the elimination of their languages by something like an Aboriginal Reconciliation Day? Will the minister also put the same kind of price on that so she can explain to the First Peoples, as she apparently is willing to explain to Holocaust survivors, that that is why she equates the importance of a day that may be proclaimed in the future for them, as it was proclaimed in the past in memorial of the Holocaust, that it is now on a par in the view of the legislature of the people of British Columbia with red tape reduction?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Honourable Chair, and through you to the member opposite. As I've stated repeatedly, this isn't an either or. It isn't a comparison. This is a piece of legislation that we are bringing forward to ensure that the government maintains our focus on an annual day, to ensure that we're establishing a commitment to reduce red tape and the administrative burden imposed on citizens and businesses. This legislation demonstrates our commitment to institutionalizing ongoing reforms, streamlining and modernizing the provincial regulatory framework for good governance and economic well-being.